Films and Ideology by Andrew Dix. Andrew Dix begins the essay with a reference to the polysyllabic referent gender, race, class used by Robin Wakeman in his essay on the African American film Boys and the Hood. Wakeman thought that the very term would help in defining the position of a person as a social being. But Dix finds that even such a generous formulation as gender, race, class is insufficient to evoke the full range of ideological domains in which a person is situated. The term sexuality also should be incorporated so that will result in a portmanteau category: gender, sexuality, race, class. The very essay by Dix introduces gender, sexuality, race, class in film studies and focuses upon the ideology and social subjectivity in cinema. On analyzing class struggle and the struggle for class in film studies, he employs Marxist ideology. Dix notes that class status of film spectatorship has been an issue since the medium's beginning. The level of production as well is not devoid of the issue. Inequalities in access to educational, financial, and technological resources powerfully shapes who gets to make cinematic representations. Less fortunate classes get represented by the directors and writers from the well-off sections and thus result in inaccurate representations. Andrew Dix put forth the portrayal of British working class as an example for this. This structural imbalance is also replicated at a global level. He says that many nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America still lack the financial and cultural infrastructure necessary to support their own film industries and are thus prone to be the subjects of others, that is, developed nations' representations. Later in the essay, Andrew Dix elaborates on how Marxist critics have analyzed the part played by film in class-divided society. Crosher, in his assessment of the ideological effects of popular cinema going, criticizes the culture industry, that is, cinema industry, for its commodification of art and its key role in manufacturing conformist citizens. Later on, Marxist theorists sought to develop more elaborate account of film's ideological instrumentality. Writers associated with the newly radicalized Cahiers du Cinéma in France and with the journal Screen in Britain drew conceptual substance particularly from French structural Marxist Louis Althusser. For Althusser, the production of unequal social orders is achieved by the operation of a wide range of institutions he calls ideological state apparatuses, such as church, media, and arts. The dominated subject within a class-dominated society thereby misrecognizes her or his actual place in the society. Althusser's work leans upon the psychoanalysis of Jacques Lacan, in particular his theory of the mirror stage. He uses the theory to analyze the adult subject's ideological formation. Some of the canonical texts of Marxist film theory tend to present cinema as a machine for the reproduction of bourgeois ideology. According to them, the use of cinema as well is based on certain ideology. For them, what the camera registers is the vague, unformulated, untheorized, unthought out world of the dominant ideology. And this idea is opposed to the classical theory of cinema that camera is an impartial instrument which grasps the world in its concrete reality. For Jean-Louis Baudry, the forms of narrative adopted and the contents of the image are of little importance when compared to the optical systems of projection and spectatorship. According to him, the film's ideological function is fulfilled by the optics of the viewing situation itself. He compares the spectating subject to the Lacanian infant. Berkeley argues that film carries the virus of ideology in the very optical systems of projection and spectatorship. Later film scholars brought in a finer grained textual analysis, and some of these readings are in support of films that seek to disrupt the old ideological order and evoke a new one by breaking with the language of narrative cinema. Gender in film studies. In 1970s, the second wave feminism's polemical force and anti-patriarchal scrutiny extended to film studies. A number of American feminists attempted a feminist critique of cinematic women. Marjorie Rosen's book Popcorn Venus, Women, Movies and the American Dream, and Molly Haskell's From Reverence to Rape, The Treatment of Women in the Movies. In this book, she traces the gentility of film's early representation of women to the blatant rape fantasies of certain films. The book, in a quasi-sociological fashion, is concerned with images or stereotypes of women on screen. The very book was criticized on different grounds. The first criticism is that her attempt is to merely correlate the images or stereotypes of women on screen with women's actual experiences. Thus, instead of considering cinema as a system of fabrications and construction, she analyzes it as mere reflection of life. Second criticism is that it is limited in its account of the interactions of female viewers with on-screen spectacle. Theories of the spectatrix. The verbal coinage spectatrix appeared initially as the title of the special edition of the film journal Camera Obscura in 1989. Going beyond Rosen and Haskell's primary interest in on-screen images of women, the feminist film theorists began looking at female spectator herself as a key point of intervention. Laura Mulvey's essay Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, first published in Screen in 1975, presents a pessimistic account of the female spectator's place as it is constructed by mainstream narrative cinema. She talks about three kinds of look in the film. First one is the camera's look at the characters. Second one, the characters look at each other. Third one, the spectators look at the screen. According to her, it is the male character in the narrative who prompts the camera movement by gazing desiringly towards a female. The resulting image of her body is then, in an uninterrupted visual series, gazed upon with pleasure by the male spectator. Thus, she notes that the pleasure in looking has been split between active, that is male, and passive, that is female, both in case of actors and spectators. In case of actors, that is diegetic actors, male character exemplifies activity and controls the operation. In case of spectators, male spectator gazes the passive female object on screen with pleasure. Female spectator is left in an invidious position, masochist identification with on-screen passive female object of desire. Second, cross-gender identification with active on-screen men. Laura Mulvey and Mary Ann Doan theorize female spectators using almost similar terms. For Mulvey, womanliness is transvestism, while for Doan, it is a type of masquerade. In Afterthoughts on Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, inspired by King Vidor's Duel in the Sun, Mulvey uses another part of Freudian theory. She says that it is indeed possible for women viewers to identify with active male protagonists in the film. As they do so, they return imaginatively to a phallic phase of sexuality, that primal moment open to both male and female subjects. Mulvey states that for women, trans sex identification is a habit that very easily becomes second nature. This is how she puts forth transvestism. Mary Ann Doan, in her essay Film and the Masquerade, theorizing the female spectator, makes use of John Rivers' account of womanliness as not biologically rooted but performative. The essay by Laura Mulvey makes a psychoanalytical study about the condition of male spectators as well. She states that though man remains the origin of gaze, what he gazes upon, that is female body, has the potential to induce castration. Mulvey notes that in order to avert such devastation of masculine authority, mainstream film has taken up two strategies. First one is voyeurism, that is sadistic treatment of on-screen women, relished by male characters and spectators alike. Mulvey wanted to smash the institution of mainstream films because of the depth and power of its patriarchal logic. She made a series of films, Penthesilea, Amy, etc., by using strategies of avant-garde and experimental cinema to project a feminist gaze. Other feminist filmmakers produced similar films. Feminism's embrace of counter-cinema was limited as a political strategy. It did not reach mass female audience. Cognitive film theorists criticized psychoanalytic feminism for overstating the importance of unconscious processes within spectatorship. As a result, the feminist film theorists redirected attention from unconscious to conscious elements of spectatorship. For example, African American feminist Bell Hook's essay, The Oppositional Gaze, Black Female Spectators. In the very essay, she argues that in viewing mainstream narrative films, black female spectators resist all types of identifications. From man to masculinities, an explosion of interest since 1990 in what John Beynon calls cinematic man. Judith Butler, in Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity 1990, states that if womanliness is a masquerade, so too is manliness. Thus, masculinity is dramaturgical. Murray Pomeranz refers to gender as sartorial masculinity. Like femininity is a suit of clothes that may be put on and taken off at will. Dangers of ethnocentrism in analysis of men in cinema. The problem is that most of the literature about masculinity is about British and American men by British and American men and women. Curing cinema. Some precursor texts in the field are Parker Tyler's Screening the Sexes, Homosexuality in the Movies. Second one, Vito Russo's The Celluloid Closet, Homosexuality in the Movies. In this book, he undertakes image critique, documents screen representation of homosexuality. He interprets the screen representation as a reflection of homophobic formations in society at large. Russo notes that the Hays Code prevents activities like adultery, murder, etc. from being represented on screen. But the term homosexuality is not included in the list. Instead, the usages sex sense and impure love were included. This, Russo says, hints at the anxiety that policing action might not be successful. Though there were no explicit representation of homosexuality in the films of the time, he uncovers many evidences of it in them. He points out the narrative ambiguities, styles of performance, types of costume, hairstyle, etc., and establishes this. The subsequent writers influenced by the queer theory opened up a space for queer pleasure and desire. rereading melodramas, war films, and mainstream heterosexual cinemas for homosexual elements became a new trend. But Dix says that one should not exoticize all same sex bonds in cinema. He says that awareness of the concept of homosocial, that is, social and cultural, non sex relationship between people belonging to same sex, is crucial. Queer theory resists identity politics' definition of gay as the opposite of straight and argues that all sexual and gendered identities are complex, mutable, merely provisional. Benshoff and Griffin expands the boundaries of the term queer to include cross-dressers, disabled sexes, etc. But Dix notes that this sheer explanation of queerness risks abandoning certain types of gay and lesbian identity politics. This sense of diffusion can also neglect ongoing inequalities between queer cultures. Example, poor and disabled black cross-dresser has fewer advantages than the gay white male professor in an American university. Dix concludes the section with a question that to what extent can the provocative models of queer filmmaking and film theory be applied in non-Western situations? Unthinking racism in film studies. Umberto Eco advocates working as movie Indians as a means through which Native Americans could alleviate the dire social conditions which they face. Eco demonstrates how Native Americans have been diminished by Hollywood images and narratives. Instead of being represented as daring, strategic, and wise, they are presented otherwise. Such screen caricaturing of Native Americans became a subject of angry protest during the upsurge of indigenous peoples activism in US in 1960s. As a result, powerful critiques of filmic stereotypes of African Americans began to emerge. Here, an early intervention was made by Donald Bogle. He in one among his books argues that in mainstream American cinema, Africans have been restricted to 5 character types. They are the compliant Tom, buffoonish coon, the tragic mulatto, the buxom, smothering mammy, and the violent buck.